She said it with the ease of someone adjusting a seatbelt, quiet, mechanical, practiced. "You have changed." She was not looking at me when she said it. Her focus remained on her plate, cutting through roasted vegetables like the statement had not been a test. But it was. I recognized the tone. That studied neutrality she used when she wanted to gauge how much I knew. I reached for my water without answering, not because I did not have words, but because my silence unsettled her more. She glanced up just once, then looked away quickly, feigning interest in her wine. That was her tell, using the glass to avoid eye contact. What she did not know was that I had already seen the preliminary legal alert hours earlier. A friend in the courthouse had flagged my name in a sealed filing. Family court, emergency motion, listed as a private petition. No public hearing scheduled yet. She had changed too. I folded my napkin slowly and set it beside my plate. "What kind of change do you mean?" My voice was calm, uninflected. I wanted her to underestimate me. She smiled with a faint softness, but it did not reach her eyes. "You are not as patient anymore. You seem guarded." There it was, framed concern. A way to position herself as the one observing, not provoking. A subtle repositioning of roles. I leaned back, watching her over the rim of my glass. "Maybe patience looks different once you realize what it was protecting." She gave a small laugh and reached for her fork. "I'm not trying to argue," I nodded once. "Neither am I." The conversation ended there, but the signal had been sent. She was preparing for something, and this dinner was not reconciliation. It was staging. A chance to observe whether the mask I had worn for months was beginning to crack. She had seen changes in me, but not the ones she expected. Not the legal insulation I had built. Not the investigator I had quietly retained to trace her claims. Not the fact that her sealed petition had already been duplicated and secured in my encrypted cloud archive. She thought she was still the only one playing chess. After dinner, she suggested tea, as if routine could smooth the jagged edge of her earlier line. I watched her as she filled the kettle. Her movements were precise, almost rehearsed. She hummed softly. It was a song I had not heard in years, one she used to play when we were first married. That was no accident. She was not nostalgic. She was strategic. She handed me my cup with a smile, then sat across from me on the couch. "You seem tired lately. Everything all right at work?" The concern in her voice was new, manufactured. She had never asked about my work unless it affected her schedule. I kept my response neutral. "Everything is running as expected." She sipped her tea, then set it down. "I have been thinking about doing another wellness retreat next month. The one upstate." I nodded. "The same one as last spring." She blinked just for a second. "Yes, they are opening a winter session, shorter, more focused." She had never mentioned a winter program. The original retreat center did not operate outside the summer season. I knew that because I had checked last week. After noticing that her therapy calendar appointments were always set during weekends I had client travel, I kept my gaze steady. "You always said cold weather made it harder to meditate." She shrugged. "It is different now. I think I need the quiet." She meant distance. I stood slowly, collected our mugs, and rinsed them without a word. Behind me, she scrolled through her phone, her face lit by the blue glow. She looked like a woman at peace, or rather like someone who believed the lie she was telling had been accepted. When I returned, she was already curled into the throw blanket, pretending to drift into rest. I sat beside her but kept a few inches between us. She shifted once, then stilled. Later, after she had gone to bed, I opened the envelope that had arrived earlier that day from my contact. Inside were copies of the sealed court document, pages of pre-written statements filed under her name. Her handwriting was on the supporting documents where she described emotional withdrawal, increasing control, and a shift in stability that made her fear for her future. It was not yet filed as an active petition. It was staged. She was testing the ground before escalation. One sentence was highlighted in red ink. Client states she has attempted therapy and open communication. Partner refuses to engage emotionally, leaving her isolated and unsupported. I stared at it for a long moment, then reached for the printed appointment records from the clinic she claimed to be attending. The letterhead confirmed what I already knew. No such sessions had been scheduled under her name for the past 10 months. The address she had logged in our calendar. It was a parking space, rented by the hour. She had prepared a story where I was the problem. She was crafting a version of reality where her betrayal would read as escape. That was the change she saw in me. She believed I had stopped watching. What she did not realize was that I had simply stopped announcing what I knew. Next, I would confirm who had helped her script it, and why. By midweek, I had confirmation. The private investigator I had hired, quiet, expensive, effective, sent a message encrypted through the app we used only once before during a prior executive dispute. No names, no subject, just a single line of text embedded in the image metadata. Michael S., linked via family database, maternal cousin by marriage. I had to read it twice. Michael, my cousin-in-law, the one who had crashed with us for 2 weeks last spring after a failed business deal. The one I had covered rent for when his checking account hit zero. The one she had insisted we help through the storm because he had no one else. She had crossed a line with him. My grip on the phone did not tighten. My breath did not change. I stared at the message like it belonged to someone else's disaster. But beneath the surface, something deeper than anger stirred, a quiet calculation unfolding in silence. She had not only staged a betrayal, she had chosen someone inside my bloodline. Someone who knew the layout of our house, the rhythm of our lives, the exact softness in her voice when she wanted to redirect blame. He had heard our arguments through the wall. He had probably watched us from the hallway, waiting for the moment when my restraint could be mistaken for distance. And she had given him her version of the story first. The next morning, I pretended nothing had changed. I poured her coffee. She wore the navy wrap she only pulled out when she wanted to look effortlessly refined. She smiled when she saw me. "You are up early," I nodded. "Needed clarity," she blinked once. "Everything all right?" My eyes stayed on hers. "Getting there." She kissed my cheek, slow and deliberate. "Good, I like this version of you, steady, clear." I watched her walk away, sipping from the mug I had handed her. The hypocrisy was surgical. By noon, I was sitting across from the clerk who had flagged my name in the sealed petition. A cousin, older, careful with words. He spoke in low tones over coffee, glancing around the empty break room like a man who knew too well how fast things could collapse. "She submitted it as a placeholder," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "No court date, not yet, but it is meant to trigger review if she moves forward. Judges read these things long before they see daylight." I opened the file. Her handwriting appeared again, neat, structured, persuasive. Subject became controlling after financial pressures increased. History of emotional withdrawal, declined to attend therapy, recently became more erratic. She is setting up a protective narrative, he added, lowering his voice. This is not about getting space. This is about stacking conditions in her favor. I turned the page. There it was, an attached note from a supposed mental health practitioner verifying that she had communicated signs of psychological burden due to unsafe emotional environments. I folded the page once and placed it back in the folder. "This clinic, Leggett Wellness, have you seen that name before?" He shook his head. "Not once. You want me to run it?" I nodded. "Run it, quietly." That night she wore silk and perfume that did not belong in our home, something floral, too light, designed for someone else's attention. She leaned against the kitchen island as I came in from the garage. "You look tired." I set my keys down. "Productive day," she smiled. "Good. You have seemed distant lately." I gave a nod that offered nothing. "That has been said." She tilted her head. "We could take time away, reset. There is that little place in Lenox we liked." The suggestion was absurd. That property had been sold 2 years ago after her extended absence during what she called a creative retreat. She had not asked about it since. I watched her closely. "That might be nice." Her smile brightened. "Really?" I stepped closer, lowered my voice. "Yes. I think it is time we revisit a few familiar places." She interpreted it as invitation. I meant it as warning. Later that evening, I received the file from the investigator. Leggett Wellness was not a licensed clinic. The address belonged to a carking office with temporary tenants. No board certifications. No licensed therapist had signed the note. The document she submitted to the court had been forged. It was no longer speculation. It was fabrication. She was not defending herself. She was constructing a false version of me, one designed to shift the foundation beneath any legal proceeding that followed. She planned to say I had changed. She was preparing to convince a judge that my silence was volatility, that my distance was threat. But she did not know I had the originals. She did not know the footage she edited had been synced to a forgotten cloud drive. The next morning, I woke early, pulled the footage down to a private hard drive, and began reviewing it frame by frame. I needed to understand not what she said, but what she was preparing to show. The footage she had prepared was clean, polished, cropped with intention. It began in our kitchen, an argument about nothing. She had filmed me without my knowledge, placed her phone at an angle that caught only my voice and her shoulders. Her tone in the clip was soft, almost apologetic. My own voice came across clipped, firm, but I remembered that day clearly. It had followed a long week of damage control after she forgot a business deadline that cost us a potential contract. I had been tired, direct, but never loud. The edited clip ended before her response, before she laughed bitterly and walked out, muttering a line she would never show a judge. "You are only good at pretending to care when someone is watching." I located the original file, full audio, no cuts. I ran both versions side by side, watching how easily she had clipped the silence around her own provocation. She had reframed neutrality as aggression. There were 3 other clips, each one built the same way, selective, cropped. One even captured her brushing past me in a hallway, pausing just long enough to say, "You look like someone who wishes he could yell." The camera, propped behind a row of books on her desk, made it seem as if I had followed her, cornered her. In truth, I had been on my way to the kitchen. I had not even looked in her direction. She had built an evidence trail designed to mislead, not just to win sympathy but to weaponize my restraint. By the end of the night, I had compiled all the original files, the timestamps, the edit logs, and the metadata. I sent the package to my attorney with the subject line, "Uncut versions, begin analysis." The response came within the hour. "This is surgical." She is not just trying to control the narrative, she is preparing to press legal claims based on emotional fabrication. We need to act before she files. I stared at the screen. Then we will act. That weekend, I hosted her family for dinner. It was her idea, a performance of normalcy. Her parents arrived with wine, her sister brought a dessert tray. She laughed easily, told stories from college, touched my shoulder once while refilling my glass. They saw a marriage that looked stable, controlled, mutually supportive. What they did not see was the file waiting in my home office, a sealed folder containing every misrepresentation she had prepared, every forgery, every false claim. At one point, her father pulled me aside. "You are looking well, more grounded." She said things were finally smoothing out. I held his gaze. "They are becoming clearer," he smiled, satisfied. "That is all we want, clarity." After they left, she stood by the kitchen sink, rinsing wine glasses. That went well. I leaned against the frame of the doorway. "They always like you." She turned slightly, her expression unreadable. "You make that sound like a bad thing." I gave a small shrug. "It is not bad, it is effective." She paused, then dried her hands. "I hope you are not still stuck on the past." I stepped forward, voice even. "Which part?" She did not answer. That night, I uploaded the backup footage to an encrypted cloud and printed a copy for court submission. The motion was filed the next morning. Preemptive, calm, professionally worded. Attached was a declaration contesting the narrative she had built, accompanied by full-length footage, verified by a licensed digital forensic consultant. We also filed a notice of intent to pursue sanctions if her petition moved forward without acknowledging the falsified content. The court sealed both files immediately. A judge would review the evidence privately before deciding whether her claims merited a hearing. She had not expected that. 2 days later, her attorney contacted mine. The message was brief. "Client requests opportunity to resolve privately. No further action will be pursued at this time." It was the beginning of her unraveling, but the deeper collapse was still ahead, because Michael, the cousin, had been subpoenaed, and he was not prepared for what I had discovered next. Michael arrived late to the deposition, not out of arrogance, out of nerves. He walked into the conference room with his collar creased, his posture slightly hunched. The same man who once borrowed my dress shirts now sat across from my attorney, visibly rattled. He avoided my eyes. That told me everything. The subpoena had been exact. Attendance required under sealed proceedings, per the evidence of his communication with my wife. Messages extracted from a hidden chat platform she had not known was mirrored to our cloud when she first installed it. I had read them all. Every line. every timestamp. I had watched them cross the line from vague intimacy to strategic planning. She had not only confided in him emotionally, she had asked his advice on how to phrase her experience for legal credibility. She had drafted the false narratives on his couch. He had replied once late at night, "Just make sure there is no footage of you confronting him. Stick to emotional details. That lands better." He had not known those words would surface under oath. My attorney began with standard questions: background, duration of their communication, timeline of their contact. Then she slid a printed copy of the chat across the table. "Is this your text exchange with the petitioner?" Michael read it in silence. His thumb twitched. "Yes," he finally said. "Did you advise her on how to frame a legal narrative involving the respondent?" His jaw tightened. "She said she felt unsafe." "Did you witness any behavior from the respondent that supported that?" He hesitated. I watched him carefully. His silence was not loyalty, it was calculation. "No," he said at last. "He was never physically aggressive, just detached." "Detached is not grounds for emergency filing," my attorney said evenly. "And yet you helped her write one." He looked down at the table. "She said she needed to feel protected. And you believe that justified misrepresenting someone using edited recordings and falsified supporting letters?" He did not answer. The court clerk stamped the transcript. My attorney moved to close the session. Before she did, she leaned in slightly. "You may be called again under penalty of perjury if she continues with this claim." He nodded, not in agreement, in surrender. Outside the building, he caught up to me in the parking lot. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets. "I never wanted it to go this far." I kept my eyes on the keys in my hand. "But you helped her aim it." His voice dropped. "She said you were shutting down, that you were letting things rot." "She needed you to believe that," I said. "And you needed her to need something." His face tightened. "She made it seem like she had no options." I stepped toward the driver's door. "She always had options, she just picked the one that made her the victim." He had nothing left to say. When I got home, she was in the garden pruning back a small rosemary bush. She looked peaceful, measured. "Long day?" she asked without turning. I nodded once. "Eventful?" She looked back, the sun catching her profile. "You seem steady, I like that." I watched her wipe her hands on her apron. "Did Michael reach out?" she asked, almost too casually. I kept my voice flat. "He was at the deposition, he confirmed everything." She paused, then forced a small smile. "Well, that is disappointing." There was no apology, no denial, only a shift in posture, bracing. That night she made herself tea, moved slowly around the kitchen. As if being calm could reverse the motion of a clock, she sat across from me at the table. "I have been thinking, maybe we do not need court, maybe we can just agree to terms and move on." I studied her face. "You mean after you failed to rewrite who I was in a judge's eyes?" She exhaled slowly, measured. "I did not think you would respond like this." I leaned in slightly. "That is because you thought I had not changed." Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. "You were right about one thing," I added. "I'm not the same man." She blinked. "I used to wait, I used to believe that quiet meant safety, that if I gave people the benefit of the doubt they would act with dignity." I stood, reached into the folder by my chair and pulled out the printed court transcript. I slid it across the table. Her name sat at the top. She stared at it, then back at me. "Michael already signed it," I said. "The metadata is filed. The video logs have been reviewed. And your motion has been flagged for misconduct." Her voice was barely audible. "What do you want?" I met her gaze. "I want you to remember that I did not lose my temper. I did not lash out. I did not turn this into theater." I paused. "I documented everything." She flinched as if the word carried more weight than a raised voice ever could. And it did. She did not speak for several seconds after I said it. Her hands stayed still on the table, fingers curled slightly around the edge of the transcript. I could see the tension in her knuckles, how she was fighting the instinct to control the silence, to pivot the narrative. She had rehearsed reactions. She had not rehearsed this. "You are throwing everything away," she said quietly, eyes down. I watched her carefully. "I am preserving what you tried to erase." She looked up. Her voice sharpened just enough to feign wounded disbelief. "You think this is all my fault?" "I have proof this was intentional," I said. "The falsified paperwork, the staged videos, the false notes from a non-existent therapist, Michael's testimony. The only thing I do not have is your confession." Her mouth parted like she was about to defend herself, but then she closed it. She knew the moment had passed for denial. I made mistakes, she said at last. No, I replied. Mistakes are accidents. You made preparations. She stood slowly, as if still clinging to some invisible dignity. She turned toward the window, arms crossed. It never had to go this far. But you filed first, I reminded her. Quietly, strategically, you chose escalation before conversation. She turned halfway, still avoiding full eye contact. I did not think you would fight. You said I had changed, I said. You were right. I walked to the hallway and retrieved the final envelope. Inside were the documents her attorney had not expected: a request for sanctions based on misconduct, a motion for forensic review of all supporting documentation she had submitted, and an attached summary of potential legal consequences for submitting misrepresented evidence to the court. I placed it gently on the table behind her. I have filed this, I said. The judge will see everything. You will not be prosecuted yet, but your credibility will be gone. Her voice was barely audible. And what do I have left after that? That depends, I said, on how much longer you want to pretend this is salvageable. She turned fully now. Her face was composed but pale. You could have come to me first. I did, I said, for months, when you began pulling away, when you stopped telling the truth, when you built stories about how distant I had become instead of asking why. I picked up my coat and walked to the door. I am not punishing you, I added. I am removing the version of me you tried to create. As I stepped outside, the air hit sharp and cold. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the driveway. It was the same house, the same street, but something fundamental had shifted. Not around me, within. By the time I reached my car, she had not followed. Inside the glove compartment, I placed the second copy of the filed documents, sealed, time-stamped, notarized. A record of her choices, and a boundary she would not cross again. The hearing came faster than either of us expected. The judge had reviewed the motion privately, as requested. My attorney presented the digital audit logs, the testimony transcript from Michael, and a sworn statement from the tech specialist confirming metadata manipulation on the submitted video clips. There was no courtroom drama, no shouting, no gasps, just quiet reading, quiet typing, and a long silence as the judge turned each page slowly, methodically, face unreadable. She sat 2 tables away. Her posture was straight, her hands folded too tightly in front of her. She did not look at me once, not because she could not, but because she no longer needed to pretend. Her attorney spoke first, asking for the chance to amend the original motion before further sanctions were considered. A soft plea wrapped in bureaucratic politeness. The judge declined. Then came the verdict. The court finds the original documentation submitted under the petitioner's name to be materially misleading and selectively edited in a manner intended to influence court proceedings through misrepresentation. All motions filed by the petitioner are vacated. The court accepts the respondent's motion for protective review. Legal warnings have been issued. No further claims may be submitted by this party without judicial pre-approval. No shouting. No debate. Just the sound of her foundation giving way under quiet weight. She left the courtroom alone. Her attorney stayed behind, gathering files slowly, as if reluctant to be seen walking beside her. I remained seated until the room emptied. My attorney said nothing for a long moment, then nodded once. You built this carefully. I folded the transcript in silence. I did not want payback, I wanted clarity. Then what? Clarity, he nodded. You have it now. But clarity, I was learning, came with its own weight. That evening she showed up at the house. I knew she would, not because she had hope, but because she needed to believe that there was still a stage left to stand on. She stood at the threshold, coat draped over one arm, her expression unreadable. I lost everything, she said quietly. No, I corrected. You gave everything away. She stepped inside. I did not offer to take her coat. She did not ask. I was scared, she said. I thought you were shutting down, that you were pulling away. I did not know how to fix that. So you submitted an inaccurate motion. You misled the court under oath. You guided my cousin through creating misleading statements. Her face twisted, not in guilt, but in something closer to disbelief that I was still speaking plainly. I thought you would disappear like everyone else, she said. I looked at her. Then you never really knew me. She lowered herself onto the arm of the sofa, exhaling hard. What happens now? That depends, I said. on how much more damage you are willing to accept for a version of the story that no longer exists. She flinched but nodded. I deserve this. I walked past her toward the kitchen. What you deserve is not up to me anymore. Behind me, I heard the sound of her coat falling softly onto the floor, a small detail, but it carried the weight of a woman who no longer knew which role to play. I left it there. Let her sit in silence. Let her finally meet the version of me that no longer waits to be understood. She did not speak again for several minutes. She remained seated on the edge of the couch, coat on the floor beside her, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Not the framed photo above the fireplace. Not the kitchen doorway I stood beneath. Not the man who had once forgiven too quickly and asked too little. Her stillness was not peace. It was the weight of her tactics collapsing. I returned to the living room with a glass of water, set it on the table not as an offering but as a reminder this was not cruelty. This was control, mine, not hers. I want to leave before it gets dark, she said finally, voice low, but I needed to say something in person. I stayed silent, let her find the edge of her own words. I did not start this to hurt you, she said, still not looking at me. At least, not in the beginning. I wanted something to change. I thought if I pushed hard enough, you would fight for us. I watched her closely. What you did was not pushing, it was erasing. Her voice cracked. I thought you would prove me wrong, that if I made you feel like I might leave, you would wake up. You are confusing fear with commitment, I said, and punishment with clarity. She nodded slowly, lips pressed into a line. When did you stop believing in me? I answered without hesitation. When you started building a case instead of a conversation. That landed harder than she expected. She stood, picking up her coat, still folded. I guess there is nothing left to say. I did not answer. Some truths do not need to be repeated. She walked to the door, hand on the handle, but turned one last time. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I do not know who I am without someone believing in me. I let that hang in the air. Then maybe it is time you stop borrowing other people's faith. She nodded slowly as if every word cost her something real this time, and then she left. No hug, no apology, no promise to change, just the soft click of the door and the final proof that the version of her I had loved was no longer standing there. The fallout began the next morning, not with drama but with distance. Her legal team withdrew, quietly, without notice. The firm listed strategic misalignment of values in the resignation filing. Her parents reached out to me asking for a conversation, not to defend her but to understand what they had missed. I met them in a neutral location, presented the documents, the transcripts, the raw footage. Her mother cried. Her father stared at the table like he could not trust his own memory. They apologized. I told them I did not need it. I needed them to believe what they saw. Word traveled through our circle of friends next, not loudly, but steadily. Those who had accepted her narrative began stepping back. Invitations stopped. Messages grew shorter. Sympathy faded into quiet. She sent me one last message, neutral tone, clinical phrasing. I am not contesting the divorce. You were right. It was never about who changed. It was about who noticed. I archived the message. That was all it deserved. In the weeks that followed, I dismantled what remained of the shared spaces. Her name was removed from accounts, assets restructured, passwords changed, locks replaced. Not out of spite, out of necessity, not because I feared her return, because I knew I had allowed her presence to shape too much of who I had become. I did not look for comfort, I did not seek distraction. I sat with the silence she left behind and let it sharpen me. This was not healing, it was refinement. What she called change was not distance, it was direction. I had moved forward. And she had been left behind.